Thank you. I want to thank my good friend, the senator from Minnesota. She just exists to the east of me, and we share a common border, but we also share a common belief that Washington, D.C. is not devoid of ideas. It just somehow has lost the capacity to bring those ideas to fruition. I think, as the great friend, the senator from Minnesota can attest, there are hundreds and probably thousands of great ideas for small business, for workers, for improving the economic conditions of people in this country that are here ready for debate and ready for passage. What isn't a formula for success for America is the budget. The presidential budget would devastate rural communities. And I'm not given to hyperbole and I'm not given to exaggeration, but the absolute bare fact is that this budget will decimate economic opportunity, not only for American agriculture, but economic opportunity and security for rural communities. When you think about North Dakota, it's hard to imagine a state that most of the people in this country would imagine more equated with rural America. As I tease Amy many times when I tell her, oh, it's coming up from the cities, because our big opportunity to travel and to see the sights of the big city really is Minneapolis and St. Paul. But a lot of Minnesota, a lot of western Minnesota in particular, the area that I know about, is engaged in agriculture, and we share a common border, but we share a common purpose. And so I want to start out by saying, in North Dakota, we understand the value of rural communities. We understand the value of investing in agriculture and infrastructure, and how important those things are to boosting our local economy. We see the direct impacts of it on our families, businesses, and towns. Most of us, me included, come from towns of fewer than 100 people. In fact, I'm proud to say, growing up, my family had 9 people, and my family was 1/10 the population of the small town that I lived in. And we're proud of that. We're proud of our rural roots, and we're proud that from those life experiences growing up, we learned a lot about compromise, we learned a lot about work ethic, and we learned a lot about the importance of community and working together. We also learned a lot about the importance of investment. So without critical investment, our rural communities are at risk, and that could have, I think, dramatic and drastic ramifications on our state, county, families, and our neighbors. So instead of lifting up rural communities, the presidential budget pushes us down. Rural communities and the jobs there, including agriculture, are vital to many of the families I know, but really families across the country. There are over 30,000 farmers and ranchers in North Dakota who lead the country in producing spring wheat, durum, sunflowers, canola, dry edible beans, flax, honey, and many, many more crops and specialty crops and grain crops. These farmers feed North Dakota, our country, and the world. In 2015, agriculture contributed more than $9.1 billion to my state's economy. That may not seem a lot when you're talking about California, but that is a huge amount when we're talking about North Dakota. About 1/3 of North Dakota's jobs are directly tied to agriculture. There are implement dealers, veterinarians, ag retailers, and many, many more who are closely associated with agribusiness. There's countless other jobs that support these rural communities, like teachers, firefighters, police officers, and more. There's been a great deal of talk in Washington since the election about rural America. And rural America, I think, reared up its head in this past election and said, we're not to be forgotten, believed that they had secured an advocate in Washington in this current administration, only to be basically told otherwise by a presidential budget. So what does a budget mean, and why should we pay attention to it? I think the first thing we need to know about a budget is it's about priorities. It's really a values document. Unfortunately, the president's budget shows the administration doesn't value North Dakota or really, in fact, rural America. In fact, it targets both. Today I want to talk a little bit more specifically about how devastating this budget would be for rural communities across my state and across the country. This budget would slash USDA's budget by over 21%, cutting $231 billion from funding from the Farm Bill over the next decade. It would specifically cut $29 billion to crop insurance over the next decade. This is crop insurance that our farmers rely on, especially at a time of challenging weather and low commodity prices. Crop insurance helps prevent family farms from going under when disaster strikes. Without affordable crop insurance program, a drought or a flood could wipe out the wealth of an entire family and basically bankrupt a family farm. When ranchers and farmers do well, North Dakota does well, and so will the rest of the country. To challenge these farmers with a crop insurance program that will be non-existent is to take away the opportunity for food security in this country, food security that is so closely linked and important to national security. The President's budget also prevents USDA from achieving its mission to support rural communities by drastically reducing field staff. The budget calls for reducing staffing levels at USDA by 5,200 employees. Nearly 2,500 of those employees are with Farm Service Agency, Rural Development, and Natural Resources. So what does that mean? The Farm Service Agency caseloads have increased in North Dakota, and current hiring ban has hampered efforts to administer the farm program, those efforts which are critical to farmers as they make their business decisions. I can't tell you the number of times farmers across my state have come up to me and said how grateful they are for the Farm Service Agency being available in their county and being available to them to provide advice and much needed documentation on their decision making on how they're going to implement the farm program. In fact, I tease those farmers a little bit because they always say, you know, that farm service gal, usually a woman, who has been with the agency for over decades and knows that farm as well as that farmer. And when that farmer walks through the door to get that advice and to get that number, they know not only do they have a friend sitting over across the table, probably a neighbor sitting across the table, they have an advocate sitting across the table. We don't want to lose that connection to this vital service, the Farm Service Agency, by making this about picking up the phone and pressing buttons and talking to someone who barely would even understand or even know North Dakota or the county that the farmer's in. So at a time when farmers and ranchers are already experiencing low commodity prices, these cuts to the Farm Service Agency would limit the ability of that agency to provide timely, accurate, and useful services to our family farmers and our ranchers. The budget, again, would create huge challenges for rural health care. On top of the $800 billion plus dollars taken out of the Medicaid program by the Republican health care bill, this budget would also cut $610 billion from Medicaid by reducing it to a block grant program. Medicaid is a life-saving, cost-effective program that enables more than 90,000 seniors, individuals, and children with disabilities and low-income families to get affordable, quality care. I want you to just think about the enormous challenge of delivering health care in a sparsely populated area. One of the challenges that my rural health care providers have not had in the last many years since the implementation of the Affordable Care Act is uncompensated care. But when we go back to uncompensated care, on top of operating on razor-thin margins, we're now going to say, not only are we operating on razor-thin margins, but you're not going to have your bills paid, making it impossible for you to meet payroll, impossible for you to continue to provide these resources. And so we've got real challenges in rural health care as a result of this budget and the Republican proposal. The President's budget also cuts nearly $400 million in federal funds for substance abuse prevention and behavioral health workforce training programs at the same time that every part of this country, particularly rural parts of our country, are facing opioid abuse. In North Dakota alone, fatalities from opioid abuse has grown 125%. I just met yesterday with the North Dakota Medical Association, who told me that every day this week in Fargo, North Dakota, there's been a death as a result of overdoses. It's hard to imagine that that's happening in our rural communities in places like North Dakota, but it is. I talked to the healthcare provider in Dickinson, North Dakota, who told me where his average percentage of Medicaid recipients in his hospital is about 15 to 20%. As it relates to the opioid and behavior and mental health, it's well over 60, bordering on 70%. That the population without Medicaid dollars would not be able to get that important rehabilitation and treatment services. Last week, I also visited one of our rural airports that's dependent on essential air service. That is absolutely critical to maintaining air service in Jamestown, in Devils Lake, and now in Dickinson, who has gone back to essential air service after years of not needing that support because of the growth in the Bakken oil field. So last week, talking to the folks at Dickinson, they tell me that there's 475 jobs which are dependent on the airport, which help generate $76.6 million for the area in 2015. The Dickinson Airport would receive about $4.2 million in assistance from the Essential Air Service each year. But when you look at what that investment pays off in terms of dividends, it seems like a small price to pay. It would eliminate funding to protect the President's budget, would eliminate funding to protect water programs and infrastructure in rural areas, which have improved water and wastewater systems for more than 40 North Dakota towns, tribal reservations, and water districts since 2010. This budget would also eliminate the Community Development Block Grant Program, which helped the state of North Dakota improve housing conditions for low and moderate income families, with over $4.9 million in investments in 2016 alone. It would eliminate economic development assistance and administration that's provided over $34 million in investments since 2009 to local development organizations in North Dakota, particularly those in rural towns. The list goes on and on and on. We haven't talked about what reduction in services for export markets. We haven't talked about research reductions at USDA and what that would mean. We haven't talked about eliminating trade assistance. All of these things have huge consequences for large pieces of the United States of America. Now, what I would say to the administration, rural America expects better. Rural America thought they were going to get better than this. And so rural America has enough challenges. We have volatile commodity prices, healthcare shortages, declining populations, and I would tell you today in North Dakota, potential disaster with drought. The President's budget would not only not help rural America thrive, it would only make matters worse. Rather than taking an axe to proven successful programs that strengthen our rural communities, we need strong investments in rural communities, jobs, and families that help support North Dakota's future. With this budget, the administration's priorities are clear for everyone to see. It's now Congress's job to set spending priorities and fund programs and rural America to a level so that we know rural America can not only survive, but can thrive. North Dakota needs and deserves a strong voice at the table. And I'll make sure that we tell the story of all these programs. We tell the story of how critically important these programs are to maintaining our opportunity to produce food in our country, but also to raise our children in rural settings. And so it is beyond belief to me that we are, in fact, in this situation, given the level of support that rural America provided to this administration and to this president during the last election. We know we can do better, and we will do better. We know we can't waste money. We know that we have to deploy these valuable resources in ways that actually produce results. I can show you result after result after result, and the importance of providing these services so that rural communities can thrive. A little known fact, and I'll close with this, a little known fact is that so many of our rural communities today are the most impoverished places in America. People, when they think of poverty, they think of inner city poverty. They think of other kinds of pieces of America that are not, that they've seen. But we know that the rates of poverty, the rates of challenges in terms of health care, education, those challenges are much greater in rural America. The last thing we need to do is saddle rural America with a 500-pound rock, put it on their back, and still expect them to thrive. This budget is a 500-pound rock on the back of our farmers who work every day to put food on their table, but more importantly, work every day to feed America. So with that, Mr. President, I'll yield the floor and turn back to my friend from the state of Minnesota.